No, good morning, Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor for me and for the Deputy Director General, Ambassador Thompson, to welcome you to our modest headquarters here in Geneva. We're delighted to have you among us. And I've interposed myself into the program, which the Deputy Director General was supposed to do, simply because I have to leave in an hour or two on another official visit. So I won't be with you, and I really regret that because I had hoped to be able to spend more time with you, at least to welcome you a little more properly. But at least I have this brief moment with you. And I'm particularly grateful to Honorable Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who chairs the high-level panel. I've had the honor and great pleasure of knowing the President for some number of years. I spent 5 wonderful years of my life in Liberia, a country and whose people I very much love. Despite that, I've never made it back, despite many invitations by the President to come back during her tenure. I never quite made it, but I'm very devoted to Liberia, and I'm grateful to the President for chairing this panel and also for joining us today. Now, I see that your objective here is to review advocacy materials and research findings for the HLPM report to the AU Summit in July. And with this in mind, I would just like to venture several points from my perspective. First of all, just what is the global migration context? Secondly, what are the global frameworks that we're working with now? And thirdly, the role of data as a fundamental need. On the global context, I think it's quite obvious that we have more people on the move than at any other time in recorded history. About 1 billion of our 7 billion world. Percentage-wise, it's about the same. For the international migrants, about 3.5% of the population. And of course, China has more domestic migrants than there are international migrants. But everything is big in China, as we know. The reason we have so many people on the move is because of the global population having quadrupled in the last century. That's never happened before. But in addition to that, you also have more people forced to move than ever before, about 67 million and counting. A range of driving forces that are going to mean that both forced migration and regular migration will remain a mega trend of our time. It will be the missing piece in the globalization mosaic. We have at least 9 major armed conflicts from West Africa to the Bay of Bengal in South Asia, starting with the problem of Boko Haram in Nigeria, Libya, South Sudan, Central African Republic, Somalia, Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and I may have missed one or two. And the bad news, in addition to that, is that we have no short to medium term prospects of solving any of these armed conflicts in the short to medium term, unfortunately. We have the tremendous demographic divide between an aging global north in need of jobs, people to fill jobs and skills, a largely unemployed, youthful global south in need of work. Having visited the detention centers twice in Libya in recent months, I can tell you that the very large majority of all those people in detention in horrible conditions are young, unemployed males seeking work. There are refugees among them, from Eritrea, Boko Haram, people fleeing that, and so forth. But this is the situation. You have climate change beginning to have an effect, where some countries are actually buying land in other countries to take their people when the sea rises an additional meter. We have natural disasters, and so forth. So this is going to continue to drive a lot of people onto migratory paths. And unfortunately, we're in the middle of a perfect storm because the world's reaction to this has been negative. We don't want migrants, we don't want refugees, we want to live among ourselves. and they're trying to do the impossible. Some heads of state are actually trying to preserve societies that no longer exist. Where is the purely mono-ethnic, monocultural, mono-religious, monolingual society? There are very few around. So this is the situation that we have. Obviously, what is being, I would say, hidden here are the historically important contributions that migrants make. My own country, I can tell you, was built on the backs of migrants and with their intelligence, and that's still the case today. If the 12 million so-called irregular Mexicans were to go home tomorrow, it would cripple large sections of the American economy. But that's not the view of the world right now. And one of the things I'm hopeful is that the work you're doing helps to refocus us on the historical contribution of migrants. Not just remittances, although the $500 billion in remittances every year is twice the amount of global foreign aid. It is almost equivalent to the $650 billion of foreign direct investment. So it's not to be taken lightly. But they're also making what we call social remittances from the expertise and technical know-how they bring back home, and then the business investments and the trade that the diaspora make, and I know Africa particularly knows about this and benefits from it. We have this unprecedented level of migration and forced migration. But there are global frameworks out there, and this is the reason that I think we can be hopeful. Most of the major agreements that were signed in 2015 include migration. It was totally absent from the Millennium Development Goals, we remember. But in the Sendai Disaster Risk Reduction Framework, it's in there. The Addis Ababa Action Agenda of July 2015 includes migration. Certainly the SDGs do, not just 10.7, but I'd say at least more than half of the SDGs have implications for migrants. We have, of course, in addition, the New York Declaration on Refugees and Migrants, which is basically the basis for some of the thinking and negotiations in New York right now. The ongoing negotiations, which will start again next week in New York, on a global compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. So it's all in there. And for all of this, my third point is we're going to need data and data analysis. We have considerably augmented all of our data efforts. We've created a global migration data analysis center in Berlin. We're working in close partnership with the McKinsey Global Institute, with the Gallup World Poll, with the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, with the OECD. We did a conference in January on migration data, attracted 700 people from 80 countries. There's a large interest in this now. We need that data to provide the evidence base to turn around people's thinking about migration as being negative. If you take one statistic from the report we did with the McKinsey Global Institute, 3.5% of the world's population, international migrants, are producing 9% of global wealth measured in GDP terms, which is 4% more than if they'd stayed at home. So the evidence is there, but we need to produce it, track the trends, and get that out there to the population. We need to harness the potential of migrants for socioeconomic development, to protect their rights and their dignity, and to identify which policies will help us to achieve these objectives. But a lack of migration data will mean that we will have misperceptions. If you consider that the 1.5 million migrants who went north to Europe in 2015, and suddenly we had what the Europeans called a migration crisis. It was not a migration crisis. It was a political crisis. There was no unified position in the European Union. And if only 4 or 5 of the 27 member states had followed Angela Merkel when she said, "Wir schaffen das," there would not have been an issue at all. Because the 1.5 million is less than 0.5% of Europe's 550 million population. Lebanon alone, with 5 million people, has 1.5 million on their territory, Syrians, and 0.5 million Palestinians. So let's say we're dealing with misleading and dangerous stereotypes, endangers the lives of migrants, and denies us their contributions. So there's a lot of mythology. When I was studying in Germany in the 60s, I had a professor there who talked about demythologizing. And I think we have to demythologize and knock down the stereotypes that keep migrants from making their contribution. So with that overly long presentation, it was meant basically to welcome you. I want to say thank you very much for this, and I'm looking forward to being with you for this portion, at least, of the meeting, although I have to leave for the airport shortly after that. So again, Madam President, your colleagues on the panel, thank you very much for coming. It's a great honor to have you here, and we're looking forward to our time together. Thank you.